explain what a test of speaking is?
Yeah, a test of speaking is essentially composed of three parts. First of all, we have a task. That's something we give to the learners, they do, and it elicits language from them, a sample of language. So we have a task. Then we have a rating scale, and the rating scale is used to grade the sample of language. The rating scale may have a number of levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever, and we try to rate the sample of language against the descriptions in the levels of the rating scale. So that's the task and the rating scale. And then, of course, we have a rater. The rater may sometimes be the interlocutor as well, or sometimes they're different people. So the three essential components of any speaking test are the task to elicit the language, the rater and interlocutor who actually speaks to the learner, and the rating scale against which we rate them. Those are the basic components of any speaking task.
The rating scale seems to be pretty important. Mm-hmm. Where do they come from?
Well, there are lots of them around, and lots of them have been published over the years. And for people who are actually designing their own speaking tests, you could actually go out to the literature and find these rating scales and see if any of them actually would suit your own purposes. They've been designed in a number of different ways. Perhaps the most traditional is the one where a group of people go into work in the morning and make some coffee, and then they just write the rating scales. This is very intuitive, and they use their experience to say this is the first level, this is the second level, and they try to write prose descriptors to try and describe the different levels at which you might put samples of language that have been elicited from the learners. So that's the first method. It's very intuitive. It's what we might call an armchair method. The second way is sort of more empirical. The idea is to actually collect samples of language from students, to show them to teachers and say, well, which ones do you think are the best? Do you think this one is better than that one, this one a little bit worse, this one a little bit... And then you actually try to describe those samples and put them into slots. So that's more empirical. Another way, a third way, is again to collect samples of language, but to actually analyse what the students are saying, perhaps using discourse analysis or conversation analysis, and then to use those descriptions to actually generate the rating scales, to actually write the different bands. So those are three different approaches, roughly described, to developing rating scales.
What about the raters? Is that where reliability comes in?
Yeah, to a large extent, this is where reliability comes in. The raters, as I said before, sometimes the rater is a separate person. That's often a very good thing. Sometimes the rater is also the interlocutor. But if the rater isn't the interlocutor, it allows them to concentrate on the actual rating process. And reliability, when we talk about reliability in speaking, we're normally talking about two things. The first one is intra-rater reliability, and this is where we're interested in whether or not an individual rater can agree with him or herself in rating the same sample of language. So, for example, if a rater rates a sample of language today and then does it again tomorrow and then perhaps in a month's time, what we're interested in is, can that individual actually agree with him or herself over a period of time? And the reason this is important is because if an individual rater cannot agree with him or herself, then it's not a matter of indifference to the learner on which day they take the test. In other words, they could get a different score, and clearly that's not reliable. The other thing we're interested in is whether different raters can agree with each other when they're marking or grading the same sample of language. So if different raters don't tend to agree with each other highly, then again it's not a matter of indifference for the learner which rater they get, because they could get a different grade with different raters. So it's really important that raters actually do agree with each other and themselves. And this is where rater training comes in. It is very, very important that raters are trained to use the rating scales to match the samples of language to the rating scales.
It's often said that speaking is the most difficult ability to test. Do you think this is true?
Well, to a large extent, I think it is. Testing of speaking brings its own special problems. Now, one of those problems relates back to the issue of the rating scales, because we actually have to define what speaking is, and that's a validity question, what it is we're actually trying to test. Now, what is speaking? How do we define it? Now, it may be that we don't have to define the whole of speaking. It may be that in this sample of language we're interested in a very specific ability, but we actually have to define that, and it has to be written in the rating scales. Then there's the issue of how the task that we ask the learners to do to elicit the language and the rating scale, how they match together. We need to be able to make sure that the kind of language that we're eliciting can actually be rated using this rating scale. So the rating scale and the task design have to go hand in hand. Then there's the issue of generalizability. Generalizability is concerned with a use of the understanding of the score that the student is given. It's very rare in testing that we want to say just that the student could do this task. We want to make more general comments like the student is able to study in the medium of this language in another country, which is taking the interpretation of the score out of the test context itself and making predictions about what the student is or is not capable of doing in the future or in a non-test context. So all these kinds of issues which are related to validity tend to be more difficult to investigate in the context of speaking. Finally, of course, there is the issue of practicality, and often speaking tests are not given because logistically they are difficult to organise. You have to have enough trained raters, and it is very, in terms of human resources, it is actually very, very intensive. But at the end of the day, if you are going to test speaking, if you think it's important to test speaking, then there's no way around it. You have to design the tasks, make sure that the rating scales work, train the raters, and just use all those people and resources.